All right. Polio. When viruses stole childhood, polio's medical legacy. And it really did steal childhoods and
Yeah.
whole lives.
Yeah, it was basically shitty.
Real bad.
Real bad.
Real bad.
And we're going to talk about it because that's what we do is we talk about
Shitty things.
shitty things.
Yeah.
And you guys like it, right?
Right. Yeah. Tell us, please.
All right, let's get started.
Welcome, Cadaver crew.
Get your dark little minds right and settle in.
Class is in session and the cadaver is already on the table.
I'm B.
I'm Sam.
And this is the Cadaver's Lessons. Now, I purposely try not to look at the screen.
But you still did when you said I'm B. It's embarrassing. All right, vitals check. Let me ask you, how's it going?
Let me just say
We can't say
this.
shitty every week, so
I
we got to
know.
come up with
Let me
something
just
else.
say this. I just feel like so dumb because I don't know if you guys know this, but this is not episode 4. And so I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm having a really hard time figuring it out. And recording and figuring out this editing thing is hard. So mad respect to all the podcasters out there because this shit's hard.
It's hard. But I got to say, I'm having a blast. And my vitals check is like, wow, how lucky are we to be able to record this? And we're like, we can make the time to do it. Don't have the time. Make the time to do it. And I think it's really cool what we do. And it's really exciting.
Yeah.
And
It's
I'm
a lot
just
of fun.
grateful for it.
For sure.
So how are we already 4 episodes in?
I know.
Really 8. Well, 7 today with
Yeah.
the case files.
Yeah. You know, a lot of podcasts don't make it past episode 3. So we're doing something.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Could
exciting.
be right. Could be not right. Don't know yet.
Totally.
But we're doing something.
Yeah.
And it's good. And it's a good time.
All right. Well, now that the mood's happy, let's bring it down.
Now that the oxygen levels are good, let's take them away.
Take them away.
Oh, that was bad.
It was pretty bad.
Joke.
It was pretty bad. But
okay. So what is polio anyways? I feel like we've forgotten about it.
Absolutely.
It's like, it's that thing that happened so long ago. And then I was doing research and I was like,
people are still alive with polio?
Yeah, not that long ago.
Yes.
And it's just hard to remember that it was a thing because it's been eradicated, essentially. Some places. But I think it's important to remember. And so I'm glad we're doing this episode. Polio is short for poliomyelitis, from the Greek word polio meaning gray and myelin meaning marrow.
Interesting.
Yeah, like gray marrow.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? I mean, obviously, the Greek word, but is it because it's debilitating and affects the limbs, maybe?
We actually talked about that in the pathophys today, so you're going to find out.
Is the marrow gray?
It is affecting the gray matter. It's in my, I need to double check it, but I'm almost positive it's affecting the gray matter. But in my notes, it's for sure. So we'll get there.
Okay. Poliomyelitis is an infectious disease caused by the poliovirus. It's exclusively humans. Lucky us.
I know. I didn't know you had found that information, and I was going to bring that up as a fun fact.
Yeah,
so
fun fact, only we can get it.
Yeah, there's this like subspecies of apes or something like that they were like, maybe, but it's never been confirmed. So only confirmed in humans.
Yay. Yeah. It's transmitted from patient to patient, passed on through fecal, oral, or airborne, aka super contagious and bad.
Super contagious.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why this spread so rapidly.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about that because when you're looking at it, it's like, why did this suddenly popped off?
Yeah.
You know, and there's a reason.
Must have been made in a lab. It suddenly popped off.
Yeah, it just came out of nowhere. It didn't come out of nowhere.
No.
It started as long ago as 1580 BC, so a long time ago.
Yeah.
And it's been recorded in Egyptian portraits. Specifically, there's this one with a priest with a withered leg and the cane, suggesting polio existed for thousands of years. And there's also paintings of children walking with deformed legs and sticks.
Yeah, which obviously could be caused by other things.
Could be, but it's just interesting that they would record it.
Yeah.
In such a way. It's not like go around painting a bunch of kids who got like broken legs.
I mean, I even think of like a cerebral palsy. Yeah.
Yeah, that could also be something relevant. So then a super long time later.
Fast forward.
British physician Dr. Michael Underwood writes the first known clinical description of polio called debility of the lower extremities. And that happens in 1789. So it's kind of silly though, in my opinion, because people had been describing it as this.
But he named it, so he gets the credit.
Yeah, but it's not even like a very good description. That's
Listen,
it.
people like so many things get named after people because they discovered it, even though we had known it was like actually going on for hundreds and thousands of years. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
just not unusual in medicine, and it's always named after the men.
Actually, there's something later on in here that's named after a woman. So, about 50 years later in Germany, Dr. Jacob von Hein conducts the first systematic investigation of polio and develops the theory that the disease may be contagious.
Ding, ding, ding. You were right.
Hooray! We finally figured that out, which is astonishing, really. And then not long after, there's the first significant outbreak of polio documented in the United States in Otter Creek Valley in Vermont, 1894. It's really focalized around the towns of Rutland and Wallingford, affecting about 132 people and causing 18 deaths. This is the first time we're seeing it 1894 in the United States on a large scale. And then it wasn't until 1907 that people knew there were even different types
A polio.
of polio.
Yeah.
And they were categorized by Dr. Ivor Wickman into multiple clinical types.
Mhm.
We'll talk more about that later. The next year, Austrian physicians Karl Landsteiner and Erwin Popper hypothesized that polio may be caused by a virus. We're
Isn't it so
getting
crazy?
warmer.
Yeah. Isn't it so crazy? Like, this guy's like, maybe it's contagious. And this guy's like, maybe it's a virus. And now we're like, yeah,
It's a
you're
virus.
right.
But that's what's so interesting about polio because the response time was so long.
It's not like we have the ability to like diagnose this and check the different types and like do this so easily back then, you know? So, like, of course it's
Yeah.
taking so long. We don't have the technology that we have today.
True. So polio hit the U.S. hard again in 1916. Centralized in New York, this outbreak heightened concerns on both sides of the Atlantic because it was not just happening in the United States, it's happening everywhere, and really accelerated the research in how the disease was spread. So we're trying to figure out like where's this even coming from?
How do we stop it?
How are so many people getting it? More than 27,000 patients were reported. There were more than 2,000 deaths just in New York,
Oh
not
my
to
God.
mention the 1,000 more throughout the country.
My God.
And this isn't even the biggest one.
Yeah, no. And I want to make it, we'll talk about this more in the pathophys, but not every diagnosis of polio causes paralysis or death.
Mhm.
And so those 2,000 deaths are so much more significant than I think what people realize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is a fun fact. The names and addresses of individuals with confirmed polio cases were published daily in the press. Their houses were identified with placards and their families were quarantined.
So hear me out. I know nowadays this sounds crazy, right? But like we don't know what's causing this. We don't know how it's being spread. We don't know, if it's genetic, if it's like we don't know anything about this disease essentially at this point. And so I can't understand from a medical standpoint of like hospitals are overwhelmed. We have to find a way to quarantine people to stop this. But like, does this seem like the scarlet letter is being painted on your door right now? Sure, absolutely. But like also,
This is a very common practice, though. We're in the other epidemics that we're going to talk about throughout this show. This happened all the time.
yeah,
Houses were marked, giant X's were put on them, families were quarantined, and if one person in your family was sick, didn't matter, all of you were stuck to that house.
yeah.
That is something that has happened over and over and over again through all the epidemics. That's not new.
We also don't have the technology. Once again, we don't have the technology to text a friend and be like, "Hey, I'm sick, don't come over."
Right.
You know?
So
I don't
put
want to
a
answer the
giant red
door.
sign on there and say, this family has polio.
Yeah,
They are shunned.
shut
Which
for sure.
it feels awful, but from a population standpoint of trying to keep as many people safe as possible, being uncomfortable and stuck in your house for however long is a small price to pay to bring down deaths
Yeah.
in the population.
Yeah.
So then polio became like clockwork. Similar to the flu coming in the fall, polio epidemics were occurring every summer.
Summer's interesting.
There's a reason for that.
Yeah.
What are people doing in the summer?
I mean, they're
Playing in the water.
Yeah, I was about to say it's got to be through the sanitation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you may be asking, why is polio all of a sudden something that we're seeing in the 1900s?
Do we have large scale sanitation and like water flowing between houses? I don't have the right name for that, but is that where it came from? Is like infrastructure increased?
Yeah, so it's kind of strange because you would think, okay, before the 1900s, definitely 1800s, people were gross,
Absolutely.
and things were not sanitary. So
Yeah.
why is this happening now?
Yeah.
And so, prior to the large outbreaks, most polio cases were seen in children from 6 months to 4 years. Usually, young children only developed mild symptoms and then became immune to the disease because they had already had it once,
Yeah.
similar to most others that we
Yeah.
face, right? With improvements being made in community sanitation, including improved sewage disposal and clean water supplies, better hygiene meant that infants and young children had fewer opportunities to encounter polio in their younger years, and it's much more detrimental to get polio later. And so, exposure to polio later childhood or adult life usually meant that it would take on the paralytic form. And so then it became much more dangerous and obvious. Whereas if a child got it at 6 months, they might not have the extreme reaction, and then they would be immune to receiving it later in life or
Yeah.
immune to that strain. So it's kind of a backwards thing. We got more sanitary, which prevented young children from getting sick, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
But then
People are
older children
exposed.
got sick. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 1931, Sir McFarlane Burnett and Damim Jean McNamara identified several types of poliovirus known as types 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
I'm like, could you come up with something catchier?
Yeah.
1, 2, and 3?
Yeah.
That's all you got?
That's all they got. They didn't even name it after themselves, though, so be thankful for that.
I'm just saying, that's super lame. And then it's not obvious which one is more detrimental than the other one.
Yeah.
It's just, is it a 1 or is it a 2? So then the United States establishes the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis in 1938, founded by Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was also affected by polio.
Which I didn't know until I started doing research for this particular episode.
Fun fact, when I was at my in-between college, my junior college for a year, one of the girls I played softball with, actually, her hunting lodge has a pair of boots from Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Yeah, I have heard this.
Yeah.
I have.
So he used their lodge and left a pair of boots there.
And they're
Yeah.
now.
And it is like 18, 20 rooms, and it's massive. But anyways, in Alabama.
Yes.
Okay. So this foundation was later became the March of Dimes, which might be more familiar to people, a fundraising organization focusing on polio research. After conquering polio, eventually we'll get there, the organization shifted its focus to improving maternal and infant health, preventing birth defects, premature births, and infant mortality, though it still supports vaccine efforts.
As it should.
Yeah. Between the 1940s and 1950s, polio came to be associated with the wrath of God. Quarantine of exposed children led to widespread panic and anxiety.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was just hitting people so hard every summer. And then you would have these really bad outbreaks, like the epidemic in 1949, where there was 42,000 cases in the U.S. and another 2,700 deaths.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. Finally, there might be a light at the end of this very, very dark tunnel. In 1948, John Enders, Thomas Weller, and Frederick Robbins successfully grow live poliovirus in live cells. So it's a step. 6 years later, they would receive the Nobel Prize for their work.
Yeah. It's huge. It's
Mhm.
huge. And I'm going to say this 1,000 times this episode. It's even bigger than we can imagine because the technology is different. I
Yep.
mean, you think about, I just want to put things in perspective. You think about COVID. It took us months to name COVID. People were having these illnesses where we were like, oh my God, they're super sick. This is lasting for a while. I'm losing these sense of taste and smell, and we don't have a name for it. And then finally we get a name for it. We figure out what it is. And it took months to get a vaccine. And as someone who worked actively on a COVID floor every single shift, those months felt forever. And that was with technology and knowing how we make vaccines and essentially having all resources dedicated to this. And it happens. I just think it's so cool that they're doing this in the 1900s.
Yeah. But to your point, it took more than 50 years.
Yeah.
60 years to really get it after the first outbreak.
Yeah. I mean, and that is a long time.
Yeah.
It's a super long time, but it still happened.
Yeah, it is very cool. And then in 1952, the United States experienced the worst outbreak in the nation's history and pushed the needle for the vaccine. Of the 57,500 cases reported, 3,145 died, and then another 21,000 were left with mild to disabling paralysis.
Okay, and then let's talk about our other episodes. We're already seeing that in these institutions, they're overfilled, they're overcrowded, we don't have the resources, and now we've added another 21,000 patients with paralysis.
Yep. So they can't leave
Yeah.
the hospital. And we'll get to the treatments here in a second, but yeah, this is happening at the same time.
Yeah.
This is happening in the 30s, 40s, and 50s at the same time as our mental health crisis.
Yes. And we still don't have any mental health meds,
Yep.
right? I feel like we say the same things every episode, but I'm like, do we all understand how bad this all was?
Right. Everybody's like, oh man, he's in the 60s. Those were the times. And I'm like,
Were they?
where were you?
Yeah.
Because it sounded pretty bad to me.
Yeah.
There was polio. There was lobotomies happening. Yeah. I don't know if I want to be a part of that.
No, because I feel like I've run my mouth enough. Somebody would definitely put me in line for a lobotomy. Do you agree? Somebody would for sure say I was a disgruntled housewife and sign me up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you're also gay, so that you got that going against you.
So just the lobotomy and the electric shock therapy at the same time.
Yeah. Just conversion therapy. Just throw it all at you. I'm not gay.
I was about to say, you're just slightly less mouthy than me.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. In 1955, we finally get the vaccine we've been waiting for. Dr. Jonas Salk develops an injectable inactive polio vaccine.
Smart guy.
Is similar to what we do today.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then in 1961, Dr. Albert Sabin develops a live oral vaccine against polio, which rapidly becomes the vaccine of choice for most national immunization programs in the world.
How far did you get in the research on the oral?
I didn't go.
Okay. It turns out to be a shit show.
Yeah, I didn't go very far because I kind of stopped in the 80s.
So I just want to say, I don't get far into vaccines because I didn't want to make this a immunology and virology podcast. The oral vaccine essentially becomes a shit show and produces actually a lot of paralysis in patients, and patients are like truly getting diagnosed with polio. And now that's why we only do the injectable polio vaccine now and no longer use the oral vaccine.
I mean, it makes sense because it's alive.
It's live, and we'll get to this, but polio replicates in oral mucosa and in the GI tract, and we're essentially giving the live virus to both of these places. Yeah, it turns out to be a total shit show.
When I was reading about it, and they were giving massive polio vaccines in all countries, this was the go-to.
Yeah.
Right? And they vaccinated hundreds and thousands of people and essentially eradicated polio in those areas.
Makes sense, right? I don't know what an oral vaccine versus a injectable vaccine has to be kept at. I know injectable has to be refrigerated. I assume an oral does, but maybe not quite as extensively. Yeah. You don't need needles, right? And so I'm sure the resources that you need are less. And so someone says, oh, thank God, we need less. This is probably cheaper to do, blah, blah, blah. I didn't look into it, but this is my assumption. It's faster, yeah. And so it makes total sense that it's what people ran with.
Especially because it was so bad, so they needed to get it out as quickly as possible. And so they were, going into countries, and the government was essentially saying, like, go get as many kids as you can, right? And they would just line them up and be giving them the vaccines.
Yeah.
And eventually, there's only 2 countries, I think now, that are still considered endemics. And
yeah, Pakistan and Afghanistan.
I think
I have it in my notes. We'll get to
Afghanistan, war-torn countries.
Yeah.
So
that don't have access.
Yeah. Okay. On that bright note, in surveys done between 1970 and 1980, the measured disability ratings showed that polio was widespread in many developing countries, leading to the introduction of routine immunization.
Yes. Let's prevent this because I hate to tell people there's no cure.
Yeah. There's no cure. You're not getting better after this. I mean, especially depending on the type.
Yeah.
1988, polio paralysis affects more than 1,000 children worldwide every day. So the World Health Assembly launches the Global Polio Eradication Initiative. After the creation of the vaccine and its widespread use, over the next 20 or so years, the world fights to eradicate polio. So 20 years. There were still outbreaks ongoing in 2010, and some countries have fully not eradicated the virus.
Yeah.
The last outbreaks were like 400 people. Obviously not as large, still large.
Yeah.
Not as large as they were, but still a significant amount of people.
And then with how contagious it is, I'm actually surprised that 400 didn't go to 40,000 so quickly.
They were in smaller populated areas, so didn't expand as much. So now let's talk about the treatments. Like, what did we do about this when there was 40,000 people suffering from polio? Without any answers or proven treatments or immunization, people were grasping at straws, essentially, and were willing to try anything.
Absolutely.
Surgical treatments such as nerve grafting, tendon lengthening, tendon transfers, and limb lengthening, plus shortening, depending on, were used extensively, which is awful. Could you
Awful.
imagine a young kid having to go through that? I mean,
No,
sometimes kids still do, depending on growth, but that's so.
those are so extreme.
Patients with paralysis were given braces and taught to compensate for loss of function of lower limbs. And now, the thing we all really want to talk about, the
Iron
iron
lung.
lung. It's the go to. When you think about polio, the first image that pops in your mind is a black and white picture of bay of iron lungs and kids in
With
them,
just heads sticking
just
out.
heads sticking out of iron
Yes.
lungs. And which I feel like is an incomplete picture. It's just the one we gravitate towards because it's so extreme and frightening.
Yeah.
But anyways, the first iron lung was used in the treatment of polio in 1928 in Boston. The original drinker iron lung was powered by an electric motor attached to 2 vacuum cleaners, which changed the pressure inside the machine. So
That's so cool.
when the pressure was lowered, the chest cavity expanded in attempt to fill the partial vacuum
Yeah.
in the tank. And then when the pressure was raised, the chest cavity contracts, mimicking breathing. The design was later modified to make it less expensive and easier to produce, and the Emerson iron lung was produced and used until 1970 or later, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was actively produced until 1970. During the polio epidemics, the iron lung saved lives, but the machine was large and expensive, costing about $1,500 at the time, the price of an average home.
No biggie.
$1,500. Could you imagine?
Yeah. You just think about now if someone says, hey, you got polio, your diaphragm is paralyzed, you need this. And what's the average cost?
Average cost of a home
In the United States?
in the United States, at least $350,000.
That's what I was
maybe?
going to say, 300K. And someone said, in order to survive, you have to spend $350,000 to keep this. And then also, I don't know if you've looked it up, but the wear and tear on these machines is insane.
Yep.
Insane. The replacement parts, so frequent.
And hard to get.
Yeah.
So there was also extreme cost of running the machine. Patients were encased for months or even years, or in some cases, their entire lives. Even with the iron lung, the fatality rate for patients with bulbar polio exceeded 90%.
Yeah. And we'll get into bulbar polio, but high mortality rate with his bulbar polio.
Yeah. So that's the iron lung. But it was not the only thing used.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Never have heard of anything other
Shocking.
than the iron lung for
I
this.
know. And the rest of them are kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think the iron lung's super cool though. Like you're telling me people figured out how to create this pressure and to get a seal close enough around their neck that it can create this pressure and it can find a way to help these patients breathe. I think it's so cool.
Well, get this. When a large polio epidemic hit Denmark in 1952, the hospital in Copenhagen had only one Emerson iron lung.
I can just tell you right now that someone in management was like, this is never going to come to us. We'll just keep one for backup. I'm like, yeah, fuck you. Here you go.
Cost $1,500. Are you serious?
Yeah.
The hospital became overwhelmed with patients who were mostly children. And then anesthesiologist Bjorn Egg Isbin came up with ventilating patients by manually bagging them by giving them tracheotomies and installing a ventilation hose. So there's bagging for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this the first time that we see bagging? We'll get to that in another episode.
I'm pretty sure and he used the tracheotomy, so it was a mixed
Tracheostomy.
tracheostomy.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm excited to do like intubation and airway management over the years because I want to know when this was actually started.
So he later constructed an automized device based on the World War II USAAF, aka the United States Army Air Force. Fun fact, the Air Force did not separate from the Army until 1947.
That's cool.
Yeah. So, based on pilots and the construction of high altitude breathing apparatus that pilots used, he created a device that automated the breathing, the bagging, essentially. This was a huge shift because patients who were dying while in iron lungs basically drowned in their own saliva and their swallowing muscles became paralyzed, which is atrocious.
Atrocious. Sounds like a horrific way to die.
Awful.
Or to even feel, even if you're, like help's on the way and you're like, I'm not going to die. Just that feeling.
I choked on a piece of granola the other day. It was frightening.
This morning?
Oh, yeah, that was this morning. Like, I choked on it. I thought I was going to have to call you for Heimlich. Like, it was bad. I don't know what's going on in our household, people choking on things. But
Yeah.
that feeling was awful.
Yeah.
I can't imagine, you know. So this was avoided with the positive pressure ventilator because of the intubation.
Okay. So patients are intubated at this point.
Well, they're intubated, but
It's a trach.
It's a trach, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So trach.
Yeah. However, early ventilators required the trach, aka meaning a hole in the patient's windpipe for the cannula of the air hose.
Yeah. So let's be very clear. This is coming out of the neck,
Yeah,
not out of the
the
mouth.
mouth, like you would picture it today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Many of the advancements for the ventilator came from applying declassified wartime insight on lung physiology and oxygen systems for pilots and sailors. Fun fact.
That's so cool.
So, when we do talk more about ventilators in upcoming episodes, just know that most of them came from the military.
Yeah. I mean, gotta get an idea from somewhere. Deep brain stimulation came from freaking pacemakers.
Yeah. All right. Here's another one.
Okay.
Passive immunotherapy. In 1950, William Hammond at the University of Pittsburgh isolated a serum containing antibodies against the polio virus from survivors. So he collected the antibodies from people who had survived from polio,
Yeah.
and he believed the serum would prevent the spread of polio and reduce the severity of the disease in polio patients. A clinical trial,
Hey, we just came out with those.
was conducted in 1952, which 55,000 children were involved in. It's a good number.
It's huge.
Yeah. Results were promising and showed to be 80% effective in preventing paralytic polio. Lasted about 5 weeks.
It's a short amount of time, though.
Real short.
Real short.
Yeah. The short span of protection was a huge drawback, and though it was widely administered, it was expensive and time consuming also.
Yeah.
So
I
people
mean, it's
couldn't
so
get a
cool
hold
that
of
he
it.
was able to separate these antibodies, but
Yeah.
every 5 weeks, I mean,
Yeah, I guess if you're like, oh, it happens in the summer, get 3 doses
yeah.
or something, 15 weeks of, but it was expensive to make, and so people couldn't afford it. Now let's get to the next cool. Like this is the coolest one in my opinion.
Okay.
Because
I'm
a
ready.
woman made it.
Hell yeah.
So the Kenny regimen. In 1940, Sister Elizabeth Kenny, an Australian bush nurse from Queensland, arrived in the United States. She challenged the widespread practice of splinting, bracing, casting that affected muscles and instead introduced a form of physical therapy that she had personally developed.
Okay.
Yeah. The method including relieving muscle spasms through the use of hot packs.
Okay.
And then early activity and exercise to maximize strength.
Yeah, which becomes so important in these patients.
By the mid 20th century, these practices had become the hallmark for treatment of paralytic polio and are still used today.
Yep. Physical therapy is like one of the mainstay long-term treatments.
It's her physical therapy.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the heat and the use of heat
Yeah.
and all that. Because think about if you're in a brace, if you're in an iron lung, the atrophy is insane. And so previously, as we talked about in the very beginning of the section, people were, in braces and they were being taught to compensate and use other muscles in order to not put a strain on the muscle that was deteriorating.
But this is the first time someone's like, no, we have to use that muscle.
Yeah, use the muscle or else it will be gone.
Yeah,
forever.
use it or lose it.
Right. And so she's like, okay, I know you're getting these spasms and these cramps, treat with heat and then exercise.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah. So what happened next? Eventually, polio is eradicated.
For the most part.
For the most part.
Yeah.
But there are thousands of polio survivors.
Can we pause on that real quick? What I didn't really realize until I was doing this podcast is that they can say a disease is eradicated, but that doesn't mean it's eradicated in the whole world.
Right. There's different sections.
Yeah, it's eradicated in the United States. It's eradicated here. But like we say polio is eradicated, but it's not. We still have active polio in, like we said, Pakistan and Afghanistan, right? And so I never knew that. I thought when I heard the word like this is eradicated, like it was gone for the whole world, but that's not the way it works. So
yeah, and when I was looking at the very detailed timeline, and we didn't get into that, but it was between really when the vaccine came out in 2010, it was slowly eradicated from different parts of the world, and it was like the Americas eradicated at this time, and then Europe, and then, Africa had a big booming vaccination effort to eradicate. And so it moved across the world slowly through years and years until really that 2010 era, and then it's still not eradicated.
Yeah.
And so, which is frightening because if it's not eradicated in the world, it still
exists.
exists, and it could be spread at any time.
Anytime. And it has been. There was a recent outbreak in the 2020s of, we'll see if I wrote it down. I don't think I did, though, because I was focusing on other stuff. But there was a recent outbreak in the 20s where somebody had traveled and then came back. And I think it was like 20, 40 people, something like that, in African countries. This is off the top of my head, but in African countries that came back with it because they traveled to a country where it wasn't eradicated with poor water sanitation. And so I know we all feel safe in our little bubble, but it's that easy.
Yep. And so back to it's relatively eradicated.
Yeah, it's eradicated in the United States.
Right. With thousands of polio survivors, all who had varying degrees of disabilities, now out living, right, trying to get back into society, they were extremely frustrated by the lack of accessibility and the discrimination they were experiencing throughout their lives.
Yeah.
So now there's no access for them to work, no public transportation or public accommodations for wheelchairs or people on crutches or anything like that. And so these survivors really pushed for the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which protected qualified individuals from discrimination based on their disability. Not to mention the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 and the independent living and universal design movements to increase safe access. So polio really
Never knew that.
those survivors, because they were all suffering from some type of disability.
Yeah.
And this was, before people had disabilities and put them away in a corner and they don't get to go out.
Yeah.
But, a president has polio, has a wheelchair.
Yeah.
And we need to find access for people so that they can continue to contribute to society and enjoy their lives and have good quality of life.
Yeah. 100%.
And now they're able to do that because these people were pushing for it.
Love that so much.
Yeah. The World Health Organization estimated that there were 10 to 20 million polio survivors worldwide in 2001, around 40,000 with varying degrees of paralysis. That's a lot. In 1977, the National Health Interview Survey reported that there were 254,000 people living in the United States who had been paralyzed by polio.
That's so much.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
So to wrap that all up, polio sucks.
Polio sucks.
And it's so detrimental. I think it was especially shocking when it hit the world in the 20th century because it wasn't like the flu.
Yeah.
There had been flu epidemics in the past, and the flu is very cough. We know what that looks like.
I think also you either survive the flu and then the symptoms go away, or you die from the flu and it's really sad. But in this, people don't get me wrong, you're still dying, but there's long-term outcomes from this that people are physically able to see.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the first times, I assume, we've seen this.
Yeah. And it was affecting children.
Yeah.
And I think that is really, really what pushed people so hard, was that it was happening to children that were just trying to have a fun summer day and ending up having polio and being stuck in an iron lung or dying. And that's completely frightening. And I think as a parent, the most frightening thing and scary thing to me in the world is having a child out in the world. And so I think that really jump-started, and parents were anxious and needed an answer. And so they pushed for it. But
we didn't have an answer for so long.
I know. It's so interesting because it was so different from a lot of the things we've seen in the past.
Yeah.
And we're used to the flu a lot of times.
Yeah.
And what that means. Polio looks so different.
Looks very different.
Yeah. So tell me about the science and the medicine.
Okay, I tell you guys, as I go through and I relearn a lot of this anatomy, because I dump a lot of it because I don't have to know it or use it anymore. As I learned it the second time, I'm like, this is so interesting. This is so cool.
And it's not in school.
And I'm so into it. But I think A, it's not in school and I'm being able to do it at my own leisure. And B, I'm learning it in context. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about anatomy, spinal cord. We've talked about a lot of the brain. And so just kind of understanding that. And this is also going to tie into some of the previous brain train we've been on a little bit. So spinal cord. Of course, in your spinal cord, you have the meninges, the pia mater, arachnoid mater, and the dura mater. And
the pita, the spider, and the
derma, as you called it in our first episode.
Derma.
So you have different sections of the spinal cord. You have the cervical, the thoracic, the lumbar, the sacral, and the coccygeal, which is what we think of as our tailbone. So the cervical has 7 vertebrae with 8 nerve pairs that extend out into the neck, face, and head. The thoracic has 12 vertebrae, which has 12 nerve pairs, which spreads out into the upper body, chest, upper back, and abdomen. You have the lumbar, which is 5 vertebrae, 5 nerve pairs, extends to leg and feet. You have the sacral, which is 5 fused bones with 5 nerve pairs that go into the sacrum and into the pelvis. And then you have the coccygeal, which, like I said, is like our tailbone, which is 4 fused bones. Interesting enough, it's actually 3 to 5 fused bones, but they just put 4 for
You
simplicity's
got
sake.
long tail or short tail?
Yeah.
Tails.
And then something that becomes like super clinically relevant is not in this case, but will in future cases, but just for people to know, is at the very end of our spinal cord, we have the cauda equina, which is the bundle of nerves at the base of your spine, which gives sensation to the lower body. So just like medical fact, when someone has lower back pain, we're always, always, always ruling out a cauda equina syndrome. So our red flags that we asked for there is bowel or bladder incontinence. So you went pee or poop and you didn't know. Urinary retention. So you had to go pee for hours on end and you couldn't. And then saddle anesthesia, which is loss of feeling in the groin area. And so most of the times when I'm asking my patients these questions, they're just like looking at me and I'm like, just answer them. Just answer them. And so then in the brain and the spinal cord, we have gray matter and white matter, which we've kind of touched on a couple of times. And I'm not going to lie, I've been avoiding the anatomy. And then I went back and relearned it and I was like, oh, this actually isn't that hard. So gray matter processes information. It's in charge of perception, memory, emotions, cognition, and muscle control. So a lot of the things that we've been talking about with our previous episodes. It's made of neuron cell bodies, and polio affects this gray matter, hence polio coming from the word gray. White matter transmits signals between brain areas and then enables learning and complex functions by transmitting it. And these are made of myelinated axons, aka nerve fibers. So I don't know if people are familiar with like multiple sclerosis and how there's a breakdown of myelinated axons, but this is primarily what's being affected there. I thought this was a fun fact that I definitely didn't remember from PA school, that in the brain, the gray is on the outside and the white's on the inside. And in the spinal cord, the white matter's on the outside and the gray matter's on the inside. So it flips.
Oh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The white is what we're getting with the lobotomy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we're getting in there cutting up those connections.
In the spinal cord gray matter, there's the dorsal horn, which we also call the posterior horn. There's the ventral horn, which we also call the anterior horn. And then there's the intermediate column and the lateral horn.
Horny.
Wow. I hope I don't have to say those again. So the anterior horn, aka that ventral horn, is what polio affects. And this houses lower motor neurons. They exit the spinal cord to innervate skeletal muscle. So it totally makes sense that we're seeing this paralysis as it's affecting it. It directly controls skeletal muscles for voluntary movement. And the dorsal horn, which is that posterior horn, that houses the neurons that receive somatosensory information from the body. And that's transmitted via ascending pathways, so backup pathways to the brain. And then that intermediate column and the lateral horn have neurons that innervate visceral and pelvic organs, which we're not going to get into today. But that's your little anatomy for polio, which I just thought this was interesting. Once you learn the anatomy, you're like, oh, this makes total sense why it affects it. But then you're like, I mean, yeah, because we know why it affects it now.
Right. We already figured it out.
So B already touched on some of this a little bit, but poliovirus causes poliomyelitis, which is what we call polio. Transmission, like she said, fecal oral, aka people not washing their hands after taking a poop. Okay, so you don't gotta do anything crazy, but someone doesn't wash their hands well enough. They go and touch something, you touch that thing, and it goes in your mouth. There's your fecal oral.
Wash your hands, people.
Wash your hands. Respiratory droplets and oral or contact with the nasal pharyngeal secretions. It continues to persist in areas with poor water, sanitation, and hygiene infrastructure, even till today. As B said, it's extremely, extremely contagious, which makes sense because it's spread so many ways. And then, like we said, it only reproduces in humans. And there are some great apes where they said maybe, but they haven't really solidified that. So I don't want to say 100% that it does.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like all the time we hear about these viruses that are in different species. And I thought it was really cool that polio is only in humans.
Black plague.
Yeah.
Came from fleas that were traveling on rats. And, we can blame the fleas.
Yeah.
But this one is, it's all us.
It's all us. All us. Yeah. How does this affect the body after exposure? So you have this exposure. It replicates in the oropharynx and the GI tract, which is why the oral vaccine ended up being such a shit show later on. Those vaccinated or with antibodies, which typically came from previous exposures, or maternal antibodies, the virus is typically confined at this point. This is even today. Virus is typically confined at this point. So polio is still out there, right? But all done. Good to go. Cool. If we see some exposures or see some symptoms, at this point, it's transient and it's this like sore throat, fever, body aches, some like muscle pain, very like vague flu-like symptoms. Nobody ever thinks anything about it. But like 80% of patients with polio, even now, are asymptomatic and never develop symptoms. So that's why another reason it spreads so rapidly, because people don't have symptoms. The incubation period is like 3 to 10 days. So that's such a long time before seeing symptoms. And so that's why it's just a perfect virus to spread so quickly.
Spreading fast, yeah.
Okay. If it enters the bloodstream, it can then get into the central nervous system, which is when we see these paralytic diseases. So if the virus enters the central nervous system by crossing the blood-brain barrier, the next thing that we'll see is non-paralytic aseptic meningitis. And the most common form of aseptic meningitis is this viral meningitis. And all aseptic means is that it's not bacterial. So viral is the most common cause of an aseptic meningitis, but not the only cause of an aseptic meningitis. So like we said, symptoms typically in patients, asymptomatic. And then if they do have symptoms, we have that self-limiting fever, GI symptoms, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, sore throat, muscle aches, things like that. In 1 in 200 cases, there's the CNS invasion, which causes rapid onset paralysis, which is terrifying.
Yeah.
Terrifying. Clinicians, even today, should have a high clinical suspicion if they see rapid onset paralysis following the viral prodrome, even if it's just vague symptoms. And the patients living in an endemic region has recently visited an endemic region or they're unvaccinated. Now, as soon as I read this, like, clinicians should have this high clinical suspicion, I was like, I'll tell you what I'm going to think about. I'm going to think about Guillain-Barré syndrome, which I don't know if you've ever heard about it, but it also causes rapid onset paralysis after like GI symptoms or like a viral syndrome of some sort. And so I was like, how would I tell the difference of those? Because my mind's definitely going more towards Guillain-Barré.
Yeah, and then polio.
Then polio, exactly. Yeah. So for clinicians out there, Guillain-Barré is ascending paralysis starting in the legs and is symmetrical. So it starts at the feet and works its way up, and it affects both limbs equally. In polio, we're seeing that it's asymmetric, so it's not happening both limbs equally. And it works from a proximal, so closest to the body, to distal, further out from the body progression. So, if you just have someone with rapid onset paralysis, you should be like, which way is this working? I probably won't. I will probably scream for help. We're back.
We're back to that.
So, in the patients that develop the aseptic meningitis that we were talking about, typically they have this prodrome, it resolves, and then they develop the meningitis. And the meningitis can be asymptomatic, right? Isn't this so fun how often this presents asymptomatic versus fever, neck stiffness, back pain, muscle spasms. And then patients have this rapid and complete recovery. And they're like, oh, I'm good. And some of them are. And then sometimes we have paralytic polio. And after this aseptic meningitis, patients have return of fever with severe muscle pain, muscle fasciculations, spasms, and hyperreflexia. And like I said, we're looking as this paralysis starts, asymmetric distribution, starting closer to the trunk and moving its way out. So where patients become paralyzed at depends on the site of invasion and extent of replication. So most cases, we're seeing spinal paralysis resulting in paralysis of the lower limbs. Okay, so affecting the different regions of the spinal cord. Less commonly, we'll see the arms, trunk, and diaphragm, so it's working its way slowly up. And then there's the bulbar aspect of the brain, which I had never heard about before this podcast. But funny enough, was listening to a podcast on the way to work this morning, and they mentioned it for the first time. And basically, anything with bulbar involvement, bad news. So when we have the bulbar involvement, it affects control of breathing, facial and eye movements, and swallowing, which is what you were talking about earlier with people essentially drowning in their own secretions. Thank God this is rare, but it is still happening. And very scary for these patients. So diagnosing, like I said, we have to have a high clinical suspicion and really get like a good history from these patients in terms of travel history and vaccination history. But the official diagnosis is made via viral cultures, which is best from the stool, but can also be done from the CSF, cerebral spinal fluid, and oral pharyngeal secretions. Now, the treatment, none. There's no antiviral. And so I want to reiterate for people, because I feel like there's a big confusion in this. When there is an illness that is caused by a bacteria, that's when we give antibiotics. When there is an illness caused by a virus, which is like your common cold, and there's no sort of bacterial infection secondary to that, like a pneumonia, typically we don't have antivirals for this. Now, the cases where we do are like flu and COVID. We have antivirals for those, but it's a lot less common to have antivirals than it is to have antibiotics to treat things. There's no cure for polio. There's no antiviral for it. There's nothing, which means prevention is super duper critical, aka sanitation, water infrastructure, vaccines. So how are we treating people with polio? Supportive care, which I really literally wrote in my notes, LOL, because supportive care when I'm talking to a patient who has a cold is so easy. Tylenol for fever, ibuprofen for body external discomfort, rest, hydration, over-the-counter cough and cold medications, blah, blah, blah. But here we're talking like what symptom comes and what complication comes from polio. That's what we're treating. So respiratory paralysis, mechanical intubation. So it sounds like, oh, no big deal, supportive care. But like it is a very big deal. We just literally are treating the symptoms as they're coming, right? Long term, patients are going to rehab to work on that muscle strength. We're talking a lot about fall prevention in these patients because they actually become osteoporotic and they see a lot of fragility fractures secondary to these falls. So we're trying to prevent these falls. We still see patients in ankle foot or knee ankle braces to help gait disturbances, and then that muscle training that the woman developed earlier. So,
Kenny.
yeah. And so we just have such poor actual treatment of this. And once again, I think people forget how bad polio is because it's eradicated in the United States. And they're like, oh, no big deal. And I'm like, no, this is a really big deal.
Yeah.
This is a really big deal.
It's not a fun time.
No. So let's talk about long-term outcomes. Even in patients with the acute paralytic polio, there is the possibility of very slow improvement of paralysis, which I thought was really cool. So there's regeneration, collateral axonal sprouting, and development of compensatory processes to lead to this slow improvement. Now it's slow, very slow. And a lot of patients do not regain full functionality of their limbs. So I don't want this to sound like, it's okay, we'll get there, because it's not 100% functionality. In chronic cases, there's functional disorders of the limb, the trunk, respiratory muscles, including the diaphragm. A little note in here, remember my friends in school or my friends at the bedside, C345 keeps the diaphragm alive, and I will never forget it. I don't know why, it just rhymes. But Brittany's like, why do we do that?
No, I know that one.
Yeah, it's like one of the
random true crime one.
People cut.
People kill people all the time, and if you want to paralyze them, but keep them alive.
Well, this kills them. The diaphragm not working, dead.
Yeah, but if you want to, so if you go lower, you want to paralyze them, but so they can't move, but you want to keep them alive.
Yeah.
Go lower.
God, I hate that people know this.
I know it.
Yeah, of course you do. Of course you do. In children that were diagnosed with polio, the deformities actually progressively get worse over time due to muscular imbalances or dysfunction of the growing skeleton. So we see these children with joint contractures, kyphosis, scoliosis, and leg length discrepancies. I was actually talking to an attending I worked with today saying that we were going to record this tonight, and I believe it was her grandmother. She said her grandmother had polio, congenital polio. And thank God, the only long-lasting effect was her feet grew 2 different sizes. Because remember, this is asymmetrical, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so she always had to buy 2 different pairs of shoes because they were significantly different sizes.
That's wild.
Wild, right? But great that that's your only long-term.
Lucky almost.
Yes. Approximately 60% of polio survivors have permanent deficits.
Yeah.
That's a lot. And then there's something super fun called post-polio syndrome. So in patients with any sort of paralysis or long-lasting effects, they'll go decades without this getting any worse and it'll be stable. And then all of a sudden they'll just start developing this new onset weakness or fatigability and have to re-go through treatment and rehab and all of these things for it.
It just doesn't end.
It doesn't end for these patients.
Once you get it, it's a lifelong.
Yeah. Yep. And I wanted to make this clear that this is not infectious. It's not a reactivation of the infection whatsoever. It's just after decades, they start getting these new onset of symptoms. Yeah.
Boo.
Boo. So recent outbreaks. Oh, I did write this down. Cool. There is still an endemic in Pakistan and Afghanistan, which obviously, like Bernie said, are places of war.
In the past have been war-torn countries for many, 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 many years.
Yeah. And so it makes total sense why this is a place of an endemic. In 2021 and 2022, there were 9 paralytic polio patients diagnosed. That was 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was traced back to transmission in Pakistan after traveling. And then in 2023 and 2024, there were 23 documented cases of just polio. And it didn't differentiate in the study I was reading between paralytic or not because it was such recent data that all the studies hadn't came out on it yet.
It's still out there.
Yeah, it's still out there. It is a CDC reportable disease, meaning if I was to ever diagnose it, I have to call the CDC immediately. And so even though it's reportable, that doesn't mean that we're finding all of these patients that have polio, especially if you're thinking about like the asymptomatic ones and then the aseptic meningitis that we just diagnosed as aseptic meningitis, give them their steroids and send them home. I think it's still so much more than this.
Yeah, it's frightening, it's only if coming from humans and we keep it around.
We keep it around.
We keep it around by not being able to eradicate it, and it just is so scary. It's so frightening.
It's super frightening. Yeah. As far as prevention, we kind of talked about this. The vaccine, obviously the greatest way of prevention. There is a greater than 99% protection rate after all, aka 3, all recommended doses. 99%.
That's good odds.
That's fantastic odds.
I don't know who is a sport betting person.
Yeah, I would take those odds.
I would take those odds.
Yeah.
I did. Well, my parents did.
Yes.
And we did.
Of course, hand hygiene, which we talked about, and contact precautions. But typically, after you figure out that a patient has polio, they've already affected or at least exposed so many people prior to that. And then there has been studies that show that chlorine, heat, UV light, and formaldehyde are fantastic at inactivating the virus. And I actually thought it was really interesting that there's that many things that can inactivate it because we don't see that often with viruses.
Yeah, usually they stick around.
Or like I think about like yeah. So interesting stuff, really sad stuff, but interesting stuff. I think in our case file this week, we're going to talk about the outbreak and how quarantines and everything like that happen. But then I also want to bring up 3 big cases. And it's sad because the guy that was the longest in the iron lung actually just died in 2024. There's a female that's still using the iron lung. She only uses it at night. But I was telling Bernie, like, it's really sad because the iron lung, like, obviously isn't being produced anymore. And so its parts aren't being produced, but there's a lot of wear and tear on these machines. And they're literally calling around to museums trying to get replacement parts. And some museums are like, no, we want to keep our machine fully intact. And so even though we think like, once again, polio is a thing of the past, like there is one person that I could find actively alive today, still using her iron lung and having to replace parts frequently on it.
That's just wild.
Wild.
So easy to forget when you don't have somebody in your life who is experiencing it.
Yeah, I agree.
And so it's easy to push off to the side, like, oh, I don't know anybody with that, so what do I care?
Yeah.
And it's like, have a little empathy, everybody.
Have a little empathy. I thought it was super interesting, but also super sad that manufacturers essentially just left people with the iron lung in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all about them.
Is there an ethics autopsy with this?
I mean, ethically, polio sucks.
Yeah.
But as far as like the treatment and the push to get it eradicated on a world scale.
Yeah.
From world leaders getting together and scientists getting together to try to push this forward, it took forever, but I think people were generally in the right.
I agree.
Pushing
Overall
for
on
the
this.
right thing.
Overall in this, I 100% agree. The diagnosis cases are a lot less depressing than the treatment cases where we do shitty things to people nonstop.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
We got to mix it up sometimes, you know?
Yeah. I mean, children are dying.
Yeah, so that's not good.
So we're still not a light podcast for you guys. Yeah.
And then obviously cut polio.
Cut it.
Don't be keeping that around.
Cut it out.
Yeah.
All right. You can support us by following us on Instagram and TikTok at _cadavers_lessons. I promise at some point we're going to get our TikTok figured out. We have tried many, many times to post.
I submitted a ticket.
Yeah, we have an official ticket in. At some point, we will be able to upload to TikTok. Talk about feeling like a boomer. Because we can't figure out TikTok. Neither one of us had ever downloaded it before we started the podcast. So
we're lame.
We watch Instagram
old
Reels.
millennials. I guess we're not that old millennials.
We're not.
But we're in that time frame.
Yeah. You can also support us by doing a donation at buymeacoffee.com/the_cadavers_lessons. You can currently listen on Spotify, Apple, and Amazon. And what's really helpful for us is leaving a review, sharing your podcast with your friends, leaving a comment, but definitely like listening to the podcast so that we can get streams up. So it's really, this sounds so dorky, but we're almost at 100 streams after just our first episode has been out. And it's so exciting. So obviously we're recording ahead of time.
For listening.
Yeah. If you ever have an idea for an episode or a case or have an interesting medical story, DM us on social media. At some point, we'll have a website up and you'll be able to submit something there. But for now, just send us a DM. We already kind of gave a sneak peek of our case file for this week. But the episode for next week, we are going to tackle HIV and AIDS, which I'm really excited for.
That's another really brutal one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really sad. When you go from talking about populations that are suffering, and polio has a distinct population that was suffering because of it, and HIV and AIDS obviously has a huge population that's
Yeah.
underrepresented.
Yeah. I'm excited from the medical standpoint to talk about a lot of the myths that are associated with it.
Yeah.
And just be like, no, guys, listen, these people are okay. Like, we have so many great treatments for them now. But I also know it's going to be really depressing in the medical history of it.
Don't worry, I'll talk about that.
Yeah, I'll give you hope. It's fine. Remember,
I'll bring you
pessimist,
down.
pessimist and optimist over here.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, friends. Class is dismissed.
Stay safe
Stay curious,
and don't try this at home.
unless you have a bone saw. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. We discuss the history of medicine, not your personal medical situation. Nothing you hear on this show should ever be taken as medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Some of the information discussed may be incorrect or become outdated over time. We do our best to stay current with medical knowledge, but medicine changes quickly. Additionally, because we do not work in every specific field we discuss, there may be times when we misspeak or misinterpret information. We're all human and we're doing our best for the podcast. Every medical case is unique, and your health decisions should always be made in consultation with your own qualified healthcare professional. If you have any questions or concerns about your health, please reach out to a licensed provider who can give you guidance based on your individual needs.